In a small, peaceful town surrounded by green hills and thick forests, life moved at its own calm pace. People knew each other by name, and the biggest news was usually about the annual harvest festival or someone's new baby. But one day, everything changed for one family in this quiet little town. The mother, who everyone called Ma, lived with her husband and their only son. Their boy wasn't just any child, he was special. He had grown into a smart, kind-hearted young man full of dreams. Everyone in the neighborhood liked him because he always had a smile on his face and went out of his way to help others. After years of hard work, he had recently graduated from college, and the entire town celebrated his success. His parents were so proud of him. They imagined him building a bright future, maybe even moving to the city someday to chase bigger opportunities. But fate is cruel sometimes. On a cold, rainy night, disaster struck. The boy was driving home after celebrating his graduation with friends. The roads were slick from the rain and visibility was poor. Suddenly, there was an accident, a bad one. By the time help arrived, it was too late. The young man didn't make it. When Ma heard the news, her world shattered. It felt like someone had ripped out her heart. She couldn't believe it. Just hours ago, her son had been alive, laughing and talking about all the plans he had for the future. Now, he was gone. Gone forever. Her husband sat silently beside her, tears streaming down his face, unable to speak. The house that once buzzed with laughter now felt empty, like a shadow of what it used to be. As word spread through the town, neighbors came to offer condolences. Some brought food, others simply sat with the grieving couple, holding their hands. Everyone tried to comfort them, but nothing could fill the void left by the loss of their son. Days turned into sleepless nights as Ma replayed every moment she'd spent with her boy in her mind. Every memory felt sharp, like a knife cutting deeper into her soul. Preparing for the funeral was unbearable. Choosing clothes for her son's final rest, picking flowers, writing words to say goodbye, it all felt wrong. How could she possibly let go of her child? Friends told her it would get easier with time, but she didn't want to hear that. Time wouldn't bring her son back. During the wake, Ma sat next to the closed coffin for hours, staring at it without blinking. People whispered around her, urging her to eat something or take a break, but she ignored them. Her eyes stayed glued to the polished wood, as if hoping it might open and reveal her son sitting inside, smiling like nothing had happened. But reality kept hitting her over and over again. That night, as the house fell silent, Ma lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. Her mind raced with thoughts she couldn't control. Something about her son's death didn't sit right with her. Sure, accidents happen, but this felt different. Too sudden. Too final. Why hadn't anyone seen it coming? And why did the authorities close the case so quickly? An idea began forming in her head. An idea that scared her but also gave her a strange sense of purpose. Maybe she was being foolish, maybe people would think she was crazy, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed answers. Answers that no one else seemed willing to look for. By morning, she had made up her mind. Before the funeral, before saying her last goodbye, she decided she needed to see her son one more time. Not just glance at him through glass or peek during the ceremony. She needed to open the coffin herself. What she found when she did would change everything, not just for her, but for the entire town. The days leading up to the funeral were a blur of pain and numbness for the mother. She moved through them like a ghost, her body present but her mind far away. Friends and family tried to help, bringing food, offering hugs, and saying all the things people say when someone dies. He's in a better place. Time heals all wounds. You'll see him again someday. But none of it brought her comfort. Those words felt hollow, like they belonged to another world, not hers. Her son was gone, and nothing could change that. Every time she looked at the coffin sitting in the corner of the room during the wake, her chest tightened. It was closed, sealed shut as if to hide something. The undertakers had said it was because of the accident, that his injuries were too severe to be seen by loved ones. At first, she accepted their explanation without question. After all, why would anyone lie about something so painful? But as the hours passed, doubts began creeping into her mind. Why hadn't she been allowed to identify him herself? Why did no one mention seeing his body after the crash? These questions buzzed in her head like mosquitoes on a summer night, impossible to ignore. The more she thought about it, the more uneasy she became. Something wasn't right. Call it a mother's instinct or just gut feeling, but deep down, she knew there was more to the story than what she'd been told. That night, while everyone else slept, she lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. Her husband's breathing beside her was steady and calm, but hers was shallow and uneven. Sleep wouldn't come. How could it? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of her son. The way he used to laugh. The way he'd run to greet her when he came home from school, the way he hugged her tight before leaving for college. He couldn't be gone. It didn't make sense. Finally, around 3 a.m., she slipped out of bed silently, careful not to wake her husband. She grabbed a sweater and tiptoed downstairs. The house was dark except for the faint glow of the street lamp outside filtering through the curtains. She walked over to the coffin sitting solemnly in the living room, its polished surface gleaming under the dim light. Her hands trembled as she reached for the latch holding it shut. For a moment, she hesitated. What if she regretted opening it? What if she saw something she couldn't unsee? But the pull was stronger than her fear. She needed to know, for herself, for her sanity. Taking a deep breath, she unlatched the lid and slowly pushed it open. Inside, wrapped in white fabric, lay the body. She leaned closer, peering into the face of the person inside. And then, her blood ran cold. It wasn't her son. Her heart pounded, so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. She blinked, thinking maybe her tired eyes were playing tricks on her. But no matter how many times she looked, the truth remained the same. The face staring back at her wasn't familiar. It wasn't her boy. This man, if you could even call him that, was someone else entirely. His features were different. His hair shorter, his skin tone darker. Even the clothes he wore weren't the ones her son had left the house in that fateful night. Panic bubbled up inside her, threatening to overwhelm her. Who was this person? Where was her son? Had someone made a terrible mistake? Or worse, was this part of some sinister plot? She slammed the coffin shut, her hands shaking violently now. Her mind raced faster than ever before. Who could she trust with this information? If she told the wrong person, would they silence her too? Was her son still alive somewhere, waiting for her to find him? Forcing herself to stay calm, she locked the coffin again and crept back upstairs. Her husband stirred slightly as she climbed back into bed, but he didn't wake up. She lay there, staring at the ceiling once more, replaying the scene in her head over and over again. By morning, she had a plan. She couldn't keep this to herself. It was too big, too important. First thing after sunrise, she went straight to the funeral director. He was an older man with kind eyes and a soft voice, the kind of person who seemed trustworthy at first glance. But when she confronted him about the body in the coffin, his demeanor changed instantly. There must have been some mix-up at the morgue, he stammered, avoiding her gaze. These things happen sometimes, especially with accidents. But this isn't just some mix-up, she snapped, her voice trembling with anger. That isn't my son. You expect me to bury someone else's child and pretend everything is fine? The director shifted uncomfortably, clearly rattled by her intensity. Look, I understand how upsetting this must be, he said, trying to sound reassuring. But we'll sort it out, okay? Let us handle it. You don't need to worry about anything right now. His words only fueled her suspicion. Handle it? Worry about anything? This wasn't just some minor inconvenience, this was her son. If they expected her to sit back and let them take care of it, they were sorely mistaken. Determined to get answers, she decided to visit the morgue herself. No one, Not the funeral director, not the police, not anyone, was going to stop her from finding out the truth. When she arrived at the building, she felt a knot form in her stomach. The air smelled sterile, almost clinical, and the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly. She approached the front desk where a young woman sat typing on a computer. "I'm here about my son," she said firmly. "I want to speak to whoever handled his case." The receptionist glanced up, surprised by her tone. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, I don't," she replied, her voice sharp. "And I'm not leaving until I talk to someone." After a few tense moments, the receptionist relented and called for the coroner. A middle-aged man with glasses and a clipboard appeared shortly after. He introduced himself as Dr. Allen and gestured for her to follow him into a private office. Once. They were alone. She wasted no time getting to the point. "There's been a mistake," she said, her voice low but steady. "The body in my son's coffin isn't him. It's someone else." Dr. Allen froze, his pen hovering mid-air above the clipboard. For a second he looked genuinely shocked. Then just as quickly his expression shifted to one of discomfort. "Ma'am, I assure you we double-check every identification before releasing bodies to families," he said cautiously. "Well, you missed something," she shot back, leaning forward in her chair. "So either tell me what's really going on or I'll go straight to the police." The threat hung in the air between them. Dr. Allen sighed heavily, rubbing his temples as if trying to figure out how to respond. Finally, he spoke. "There have been irregularities in your son's case," he admitted reluctantly. "But I can't discuss the details. Confidentiality agreements, you understand? Confidentiality agreements?" That excuse only made her angrier. Irregularities? What did that even mean? Was her son alive? Dead? Somewhere in between? She left the morgue more frustrated than when she'd arrived, but also more determined than ever. If the authorities weren't going to give her answers, she'd find them herself. Starting now. And so, armed with nothing but her instincts and unwavering resolve, she set out on a journey that would uncover secrets far bigger and darker than she could have imagined. The mother left the morgue with her mind spinning like a whirlpool. Every word Dr. Allen had said or hadn't said stuck in her head like thorns. Irregularities. Confidentiality agreements. What did those phrases even mean? They sounded like excuses, not explanations. Her son was missing, or worse, and these people were hiding something. She could feel it in her bones. Walking back to her car, she clenched her fists so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. The cold wind bit at her face, but she barely noticed. All she could think about was finding answers. If the authorities weren't going to help her, then she'd have to do it herself. But where should she start? The thought of diving into the unknown terrified her, but giving up wasn't an option. Not when her son's life might still be on the line. That evening, after making sure her husband was asleep, she sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a notebook. She didn't know much about investigations or how to track someone who might not want to be found, but she figured she could at least try. First, she wrote down everything she knew. The date of the accident, the location, the names of the police officers who handled the case, the funeral director, and Dr. Allen from the Mormay Bigueux. Then she added anything unusual she'd noticed recently. For starters, there was the coffin mix-up. That alone was enough to make her blood boil. But as she thought harder, other things began to stand out. Like the fact that no one had let her see her son's body immediately after the accident. Or the way the police report seemed rushed, almost too neat. And what about the phone call she'd overheard him having a few weeks before he died? He'd been whispering in his room, clearly trying not to be heard. When she'd asked him about it later, he'd brushed it off, saying it was just school stuff. Now, though, she wondered if it had been something else entirely. Her hands shook slightly as she flipped through old texts and emails on her phone, searching for clues. Most of them were mundane, reminders about groceries, birthday wishes from friends. But one message caught her eye. It was from her son, sent a few days before the accident. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important," it read. "Can we meet soon?" She stared at the screen, her heart sinking. Why hadn't she replied sooner? Why hadn't she pushed him to tell her what was bothering him? Maybe if she had, none of this would have happened. Guilt weighed heavily on her chest, but she forced herself to focus. There was no point crying over what she couldn't change. What mattered now was figuring out what he'd wanted to say. The next day, she decided to visit her son's apartment. He'd moved out a year ago to live closer to campus, and while she cleaned it occasionally, she hadn't been there since the accident. Stepping inside felt surreal, like walking into a memory frozen in time. His textbooks were stacked neatly on the desk. His favorite hoodie hung on the back of a chair, and his guitar leaned against the wall, untouched. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, except for one thing. His laptop was gone. At first, she assumed the police must have taken it during their investigation, but when she called to confirm, they denied ever having it. A chill ran down her spine. If the police didn't take it, who did? And why? Determined to find out, she began rifling through his drawers and shelves, looking for anything that might give her a clue. In a shoebox under his bed, she found a stack of papers, notes scribbled in his handwriting, receipts, and a few business cards. One of them stood out immediately. Printed in bold letters across the top was the name of a company, Kane Logistics. Beneath it was an address in the city and a phone number. She frowned. She'd never heard of Kane Logistics before. What was her son doing with their card? Flipping it over, she saw a handwritten note on the back. Ask Victor. Victor? Who was Victor, and why had her son written that? Her curiosity turned to unease as she pulled out her phone and typed Kane Logistics into a search engine. The results were alarming. Articles popped up detailing lawsuits, allegations of corruption, and whispers of illegal activity. Nothing concrete, but enough to raise red flags. According to one report, the company was suspected of being involved in smuggling operations, though no charges had ever stuck. Her stomach churned. Had her son gotten mixed up with these people? Was that why he'd been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to his disappearance? The pieces started coming together, in her mind, forming a picture she didn't want to see. That night, unable to sleep, she made another list. This time it included everything she'd discovered so far. The coffin mix-up, the missing laptop, the mysterious business card, and the shady reputation of Kane Logistics. There was only one conclusion she could draw. Her son hadn't died. In a random car accident, something bigger, darker, and more dangerous was at play. But proving it wouldn't be easy. She was just one woman, scared and overwhelmed, facing forces she didn't fully understand. Still, she refused to back down. Her boy was out there somewhere, alive or dead, and she owed it to him to fight for the truth. The next morning, she drove to the city. Armed with nothing but her courage and the address on the business card, she prepared to confront whatever lay ahead. As she parked outside the towering office building labeled Kane Logistics, she took a deep breath. This was it, the moment she stepped out of the shadows and into the lion's den. What she found inside would shock her to her core. The mother stood outside the towering glass building of Kane Logistics, her heart pounding like a drum. The structure loomed above her, casting a long shadow that seemed to stretch endlessly across the pavement. She felt small, almost insignificant, but she reminded herself why she was there. Her son's life or his memory depended on her finding answers. Taking a deep breath, she tightened her grip on her purse and stepped inside. The lobby was sleek and modern, with polished marble floors and walls adorned with corporate awards and framed photos of smiling executives shaking hands. A security guard sat behind a desk near the entrance, watching visitors with a sharp gaze. She approached him cautiously, trying to appear calm even though her nerves were fraying. "I'm here to speak with someone about Kane Logistics," she said, forcing a polite smile. "Do you know if Victor is available?" The guard raised, an eyebrow clearly skeptical. "Victor who? We've got a lot of employees here." She hesitated for a moment, unsure how much to reveal. "Victor, I don't know his last name. My son worked with him recently and I need to ask some questions." The guard frowned, leaning back in his chair. "Look, ma'am, we can't." Just let anyone wander around asking for people they don't even know. You'll have to make an appointment. Her stomach sank. This wasn't going to be easy. Thinking quickly, she decided to try another approach. Okay, maybe I should start by speaking with someone in management. Can you point me in the right direction? After a pause, the guard gave her a wary look, but eventually nodded toward a reception desk on the far side of the room. Talk to the lady over there. Maybe she can help. Relieved, she thanked him and walked over to the receptionist, a young woman with a headset glued to her ear and a clipboard in hand. After waiting a few minutes while the woman finished a call, she explained her situation again. I'm looking for someone named Victor, she said. My son mentioned him before he passed away, and I think it might be important. The receptionist's expression softened slightly, but she still looked hesitant. I'm sorry, we don't give out employee information without proper authorization. Is there anything else I can assist you with? Frustration bubbled up inside her, but she forced herself to stay composed. If these people weren't going to cooperate, she'd have to find another way in. Suddenly, an idea struck her. Pretending to leave, she turned toward the exit, but instead of walking out, she lingered near the elevators, observing the flow of employees coming and going. It didn't take long for her plan to work. As a group of workers entered the building, she slipped in behind them, keeping her head down and avoiding eye contact with the security cameras. Once inside, she blended into the crowd, heading straight for the directory board near the elevators. Scanning the list of departments and floor numbers, she spotted something that caught her attention. Executive offices, 15th floor. Her pulse quickened. If anyone knew what was going on, it would be the people at the top. Summoning every ounce of courage, she pressed the button for the elevator and stepped inside. The ride up felt like an eternity, each ding of the passing floors echoing in her ears. When the doors finally opened, she found herself in a plush hallway lined with mahogany doors and golden nameplates. Peering at the nearest plate, she saw the name Victor Kane engraved in bold letters. Her breath hitched. This had to be the man her son had written about. Before she could second-guess herself, she knocked firmly on the door. A voice from inside called, "Come in." Pushing the door open, she entered a spacious office decorated with leather furniture and expensive artwork. Behind a massive desk sat a man in his late 40s dressed in a tailored suit. His piercing eyes locked onto hers immediately, and a flicker of surprise crossed his face. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone smooth but guarded. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Are you Victor Kane?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, that's me." "And you are?" "My son worked with your company," she blurted out, her voice trembling. Before he disappeared. Victor's expression shifted ever so slightly, but it was enough for her to notice. For a split second, his confident demeanor faltered, replaced by something darker. Guilt, perhaps, or fear. Then just as quickly his mask returned. "I'm sorry to hear about your loss," he said, standing up and extending a hand. "But I'm afraid I don't recall anyone matching your description working here." Her anger flared. He was lying. She could feel it in her gut. Clutching the business card tightly in her fist, she held it up for him to see. "Then why did my son have this? With your company's name on it and your name written on the back?" Victor's jaw tightened, and for a moment, silence filled the room. Finally, he sighed and gestured for her to sit. "Let's not jump to conclusions," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Why don't you tell me more about your son? Maybe we can figure this out together." Though his words sounded reasonable, she didn't trust him. Every instinct screamed that he was hiding something. Still, she played along, describing her son's personality, his recent behavior, and the strange messages he'd left behind. As she spoke, Victor listened intently, occasionally nodding or jotting notes on a pad of paper. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "It sounds like your son may have stumbled upon some sensitive information," he admitted reluctantly. "But I assure you we're doing everything we can to investigate. Unfortunately, these things take time." His vague response only fueled her suspicions. "What kind of sensitive information?" she demanded. "And why won't anyone tell me the truth?" Victor hesitated. clearly weighing his next move. Then, lowering his voice, he added, "If you really want answers, you'll need to dig deeper, but be careful. Whoever you're dealing with isn't playing games." His warning sent a chill down her spine. Was he threatening her or warning her? Either way, she realized she was in over her head. Standing abruptly, she muttered a quick thanks and left the office, her mind racing with possibilities. Back in the elevator, she replayed their conversation in her head. One thing was clear. Victor Kane knew more than he was letting on. But proving it and finding her son would require help. And there was only one person she trusted enough to turn to, an old friend who used to work in law enforcement. As she drove home, her resolve hardened. No matter what dangers lay ahead, she wouldn't stop until she uncovered the truth. Her son deserved nothing less. The drive home was a blur of emotions. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white from the strain. The conversation with Victor Kane replayed in her mind over and over again. His calm demeanor, his vague answers, the way his eyes had flickered with something she couldn't quite place. Was it guilt, fear, or just plain arrogance? Whatever it was, one thing was certain. He wasn't telling her the whole truth. By the time she pulled into her driveway, her head was spinning. She sat in the car for a few minutes, staring at the house she shared with her husband. It looked the same as always, but everything inside felt different now. The walls seemed thinner, the air heavier. This wasn't just about grief anymore. It was about justice. Justice for her son, who might still be out there somewhere waiting for her to find him. She stepped inside quietly, careful not to wake her husband. He'd been through enough already, and she didn't want to burden him with what she'd uncovered. Not yet, anyway. Instead, she retreated to the kitchen, where she poured herself a cup of tea and opened her notebook once more. Sitting at the table, pen in hand, she began jotting down everything she remembered from her meeting with Victor Kane. Every word he'd said, every look he'd given her, it all mattered. Somewhere in those details, she hoped to find a clue that would lead her closer to the truth. As she wrote, her thoughts drifted back to an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years, a retired detective named Harris. They'd known each other since childhood, growing up together in the same neighborhood. Over the years, their paths had diverged. He'd joined the police force while she'd focused on raising her family. But they'd always stayed close. If anyone could help her navigate this mess, it was Harris. The next morning, after her husband left for work, she picked up the phone and dialed his number. It rang several times before a gruff voice answered on the other end. "Hello? Harris?" she asked hesitantly. "It's me." There was a pause, then a chuckle. "Well, I'll be damned. Long time no hear. How have you been?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to say she was fine, that life was good, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she took a deep breath and plunged ahead. "I need your help, Harris. Something's happened, something bad." His tone shifted instantly, becoming serious. "What is it? Are you okay?" "I'm not sure," she admitted, her voice trembling. "It's my son. He died, or at least that's what everyone says. But I don't think it's true. There are too many unanswered questions, too many things that don't add up." She went on to explain everything, the coffin mix-up, the missing laptop, the business card, her visit to Kane Logistics, and her unsettling encounter with Victor Kane. By the time she finished, she was crying softly, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, there was silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Harris spoke. "This sounds serious," he said slowly. "If what you're saying is true, then your son might have gotten tangled up in something dangerous. You can't handle this alone." "I know," she whispered. "That's why I called you. Will you help me?" Without hesitation, he replied, "Of course. We'll get to the bottom of this together." Relief washed over her like a wave. Having Harris by her side gave her a renewed sense of hope. Together, they made a plan to meet later that day at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. She spent the hours leading up to their meeting gathering all the evidence she'd collected so far, the notes, the receipts, the business card, and organizing them neatly in a folder. When she arrived at the cafe, Harris was already there, sitting at a corner table with a steaming cup of coffee in front of him. He stood as she approached, pulling her into a tight hug. "It's been too long," he murmured, "and I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." They sat down, and she laid out the folder on the table between them. "Here's everything I've got so far," she said, "but I need your expertise to figure out what it all means." Harris nodded, flipping through the documents with a practiced eye. As he read, his expression grew increasingly grim. "This doesn't look good," he muttered. "Kane Logistics has a shady reputation. There have been rumors for years about illegal activities, smuggling, money laundering, even human trafficking. Nothing's ever stuck because they cover their tracks." Well, her stomach churned at the mention of human trafficking. Could her son really be caught up in something like that? The thought made her sick to her stomach, but she forced herself to stay focused. "Do you think he's still alive?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Harris hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It's possible. If they needed leverage or information from him, they might have kept him alive. But we won't know for sure until we dig deeper." Over the next hour, they devised a strategy. Harris agreed to use his connections within law enforcement to gather intel on Kane Logistics and its operations. Meanwhile, she would continue investigating her son's personal life, looking for any clues he might have left behind. They also decided to keep their efforts secret, for now at least. If Kane found out they were snooping around, it could put both of them in danger. As they parted ways, Harris gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "We'll find him," he said, firmly, "no matter what it takes." For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of optimism. With Harris's help, she finally had a fighting chance. That night, as she lay in bed, she replayed their conversation in her mind. Each step they took brought her closer to the truth, and to her son. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. Ready to face whatever came next, no matter how dark or dangerous it might be. Little did she know, the pieces of the puzzle were about to fall into place faster than she expected. And when they did, nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Harris worked tirelessly behind the scenes, tapping into old contacts and pulling strings to gather information on Kane Logistics. Meanwhile, she scoured her son's belongings again, determined not to miss even the smallest clue. Every scrap of paper, every text message, every photo, it all mattered now. One evening, as she sifted through a pile of papers in her son's apartment, something caught her eye. It was a crumpled receipt tucked inside an old notebook. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, a gas station purchase, but when she turned it over, she noticed handwriting on the back. Her son's messy scrawl read, "Warehouse 17, Friday midnight." Her heart skipped a beat. What did it mean? Was this some kind of meeting or drop-off point? She immediately called Harris and relayed the discovery. His response came quickly. "That could be big," he said. "Let me check if there's any property linked to Kane Logistics with that address." By the next morning, Harris had news. There was indeed a warehouse numbered 17 registered under one of Kane's shell companies. Located on the outskirts of town near an industrial zone, it was far from prying eyes. "If your son left this note, it might have been important," Harris told her. "We need to check it out, but carefully. If anyone sees us snooping around, we're in trouble." They agreed to meet later that night, parking their cars a safe distance away from the warehouse to avoid drawing attention. Dressed in dark clothes and armed with flashlights, they approached cautiously, sticking to the shadows. The place looked abandoned at first glance. No lights, no movement. But as they got closer, they heard faint voices coming from inside. Harris motioned for her to stay back while he peeked through a cracked window. After a few tense moments, he returned, his face pale. "There are people in there," he whispered. "And crates stacked up everywhere. I couldn't see what's inside, but whatever it is, they're guarding it heavily. Her mind raced. Could those crates contain evidence of illegal activity? And more importantly, could her son be involved or worse, held captive somewhere nearby? She felt a surge of fear mixed with determination. They needed proof, but getting it wouldn't be easy. Over the next few days, they devised a plan. Harris suggested installing a hidden camera near the warehouse to monitor activity without risking exposure. He knew someone who could provide the equipment discreet, so late one night they returned to the location, careful to avoid detection. Harris set up the camera while she kept watch, her nerves stretched taut like a bowstring. Once everything was in place, they retreated, waiting anxiously for footage to come in. When they reviewed the recordings the following day, what they saw chilled them to the bone. Men dressed in black uniforms moved in and out of the warehouse, loading and unloading crates onto trucks. Some carried weapons casually slung over their shoulders. In one clip, a van pulled up, and several hooded figures were dragged out, their hands bound. Her stomach churned. This wasn't just smuggling, it looked like human trafficking. But then, in another clip, she froze. One of the men being led into the warehouse looked eerily familiar. Though his face was partially obscured, the build, the posture, it was unmistakably her son. She grabbed Harris's arm, trembling. "That's him," she whispered hoarsely. "That's my boy." Harris frowned, his expression grim. "This confirms it," he said. "He's alive, but in serious danger. We can't handle this alone anymore. We need backup." Reluctantly, they decided to take the footage to the authorities, but not just anyone. They went straight to a trusted detective Harris had worked with in the past. Detective Miller listened intently as they explained everything, her expression growing darker with each detail. When they showed her the video, she didn't hesitate. "This is enough to launch an investigation," she said firmly. "Leave the rest to us." Within hours, a team of officers began preparing for a raid on the warehouse. The mother wanted to join them, to be there when they found her son, but Harris insisted she stay safe. "You've done enough," he told her gently. "Let the professionals handle this part." As dawn broke the next morning, she sat anxiously by the phone, waiting for news. Finally it rang. It was Detective Miller. "We found him," she said, her voice filled with relief. "He's weak but alive. We're bringing him to the hospital now." Tears streamed down her face as gratitude overwhelmed her. Against all odds, her son was coming home. But the ordeal wasn't over yet. As the truth about Kane Logistics came to light, it became clear that her son had stumbled upon something far bigger than anyone had imagined. Now it was time for justice. Not just for her family, but for everyone who had suffered because of Kane's crimes, and she vowed to fight for it no matter what. The hospital room was quiet, save for the steady beeping of machines monitoring her son's fragile condition. She sat by his bedside, holding his hand tightly in hers, as if afraid he might slip away again. His face was pale, his body thinner. Then she remembered, but he was alive. That was all that mattered. For days she barely left his side, unwilling to waste a single moment now that she had him back. When he finally opened his eyes, confusion clouded his expression. "Mom," he croaked, his voice weak and raspy. She leaned closer, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, sweetheart, it's me. You're safe now." His brow furrowed as fragments of memory began to surface. What happened? Where am I?" "It's okay," she soothed, brushing his hair back gently. "You've been through something terrible, but you're in the hospital now. We'll talk about everything later. Just rest." Over the next few days, as he regained strength, he slowly pieced together the events that had led to his capture. He told her how it had started innocently enough. He'd taken a part-time job with Kane Logistics during his final semester of college, thinking it would look good on his resume. At first, the work seemed straightforward, delivering packages, organizing shipments, nothing out of the ordinary. But then he'd started noticing strange things: midnight deliveries, unmarked crates, hushed conversations among employees. Curiosity got the better of him, and one night, Unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong, he decided to investigate further. He discovered records hidden deep within the company's system, documents detailing illegal activities ranging from smuggling to human trafficking. Horrified, he realized he'd stumbled onto something far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. Before he could figure out what to do, though, someone must have tipped off Victor Kane. Within hours, men showed up at his apartment, dragged him into a van, and locked him away in the warehouse. They kept asking questions, he said, his voice trembling as he recounted the ordeal. They wanted to know if I'd told anyone about what I'd seen. I swear I didn't, but they didn't believe me. They hurt me to make sure. Her heart broke hearing the pain in his voice. Though she longed to ask more, to understand every detail, she knew pushing him too hard might do more harm than good. Instead, she promised him one thing: justice. Whoever had done this to him would pay. Meanwhile, the investigation into Kane Logistics intensified. With the evidence Harris and she had gathered, along with the footage from the raid, law enforcement built a strong case against Victor Kane and his operation. Dozens of arrests were made, including several high-ranking officials within the company. The media exploded with coverage, exposing the dark underbelly of the once-respected logistics firm. Stories poured in from victims who had suffered at the hands of Kane's organization, stories of exploitation, fear, and loss. As the pieces fell into place, Detective Miller arranged for her son to testify against Kane. It wouldn't be easy. Testifying meant reliving the trauma, facing those responsible for his suffering, but he agreed without hesitation. "If it helps bring them down," he said firmly, "then I'll do it." The courtroom trial was intense, filled with dramatic twists and emotional testimonies. Her son took the stand, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. He described everything: the discovery of the documents, the kidnapping, the horrors he endured in captivity. The jury listened intently, their expressions shifting from shock to anger as the truth unfolded. Victor Kane sat stoically throughout the proceedings, his polished exterior masking the chaos unraveling around him. But when the verdict came in, guilty, on all charges, a flicker of defeat crossed his face. As the judge handed down a lengthy prison sentence, cheers erupted in the courtroom. Justice had been served. For her family, closure came gradually. Her son began therapy, working through the scars both visible and invisible. He moved back home temporarily, finding comfort in familiar surroundings. Neighbors and friends rallied around them, offering support and love during the healing process. Slowly but surely, life returned to a semblance of normalcy. But the experience left an indelible mark on her. She couldn't shake the thought of others still trapped in similar situations, their voices silenced by fear or violence. Determined to make a difference, she founded a non-profit organization aimed at helping victims of human trafficking and raising awareness about the dangers lurking beneath seemingly legitimate businesses. Through fundraisers, workshops, and advocacy campaigns, she turned her pain into purpose. One evening, months after the trial ended, she stood beside her son at a community event honoring survivors of trafficking. Microphones crackled as reporters jotted notes and cameras flashed in the dim light. When it was their turn to speak, she stepped forward, gripping the podium with both hands. "This journey has taught me many things," she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "It's taught me about resilience, about courage, and about the power of fighting for what's right. My son is standing here today because people refuse to give up, not just me, but everyone who helped us along the way. And while our story has a happy ending, there are countless others still waiting for theirs." Her son joined her at the podium, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Together they faced the crowd, united not just by blood but by a shared mission to ensure no family endured the same nightmare they had. As applause echoed through the room, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she knew they were ready to face it, together. Months passed, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. The scars, both physical and emotional, remained, but they no longer defined the family. What once felt like an endless storm had finally begun to clear, leaving behind lessons that would shape them forever. For the mother, Every sunrise brought a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just someone who'd survived tragedy. She was now a fighter for justice, determined to turn her pain into something meaningful. Her nonprofit organization grew rapidly, fueled by donations, volunteers, and partnerships with local law enforcement agencies. They held workshops in schools, teaching students how to recognize red flags when applying for jobs or interacting online. They worked closely with shelters, providing resources and counseling to survivors of trafficking. And perhaps most importantly, they gave a voice to those who had been silenced, sharing their stories to raise awareness and demand change. The son, too, found his footing again. Though the memories of captivity haunted him at night, he refused to let fear dictate his future. With his parents' encouragement, he returned to college, this time pursuing a degree in criminal justice. "I want to help people," he told his mom one evening over dinner. "If I can stop even one person from going through what I did, it'll be worth it." She smiled through tears, pride swelling in her chest. Watching him rebuild his life filled her with hope, not just for him, but for everyone touched by the nightmare they'd endured. Their bond as a family had grown stronger than ever before, forged in the fire of adversity. Conversations around the dinner table were lighter now, laughter returning after months of silence. But there were also moments of reflection, reminders of how far they'd come and how much work still lay ahead. One day, as she sorted through old boxes in the attic, she stumbled upon a photo album she hadn't opened in years. Flipping through its pages, she found pictures of her son as a child, grinning on his first day of school, proudly holding up a fishing rod during summer vacations, blowing out candles on birthday cakes. Each image was a snapshot of innocence, a reminder of the joy he'd brought into her life long before the darkness descended. Tears welled up in her eyes as she closed the album. It wasn't sadness that overwhelmed her this time. It was gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance they'd been given, for the love that had carried them through, and for the resilience that had allowed them to rise above despair. Life hadn't turned out the way she'd planned, but maybe that was okay. Maybe the unexpected twists were what made it beautiful. A few weeks later, she received an invitation to speak at a national conference focused on combating human trafficking. Nervous but honored, she accepted. On the morning of the event, she stood backstage, clutching her notes and taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. Her son sat in the front row, giving her a thumbs up when their eyes met. Harris, her trusted friend and ally, patted her shoulder reassuringly. "You've got this," he whispered. When she stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. Hundreds of faces looked up at her, waiting for her to speak. For a moment, she hesitated, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. Then she remembered why she was there, not just for herself, but for everyone who needed to hear her story. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. My name isn't important. What's important is what I'm about to share with you today. Because if my story can save even one life, then telling it will have been worth every tear, every sleepless night, every ounce of heartache." She went on to recount everything. The accident that wasn't the coffin mix-up, the clues that led her to uncover the truth, and the harrowing rescue mission that reunited her with her son. She spoke candidly about the guilt she'd felt for not seeing the warning signs sooner, the frustration of being dismissed by authorities, and the unwavering determination that had driven her forward. By the end, the audience was on their feet, applauding loudly. Afterward, dozens of people lined up to thank her personally. Some shared their own experiences, while others simply expressed admiration for her courage. Among them was a young woman, barely out of her teens, clutching a notebook to her chest. Tears streamed down her face as she approached. "Thank you," the girl said softly. "Your story. It makes me feel like I'm not alone. Like maybe I can fight back too." The mother embraced her without hesitation, whispering words of encouragement. In that moment, she realized the full impact of what she'd started. This wasn't just about her family anymore. It was about creating a ripple effect, inspiring others to stand up against injustice and reclaim their lives. As the months turned into years, the town where it all began transformed in subtle ways. People became more vigilant, asking questions and speaking up when something seemed off. Schools implemented stricter protocols for job fairs and career counseling. Law enforcement agencies collaborated more closely, dismantling networks of exploitation before they could take root. Change was slow, but it was happening, and she knew her efforts had played a part. One crisp autumn afternoon, she and her son visited the cemetery together. Standing before the headstone bearing his name, a memorial erected during the days when everyone believed he was gone, he placed a single flower at its base. "I guess we fooled them, huh?" he joked, trying to lighten the mood. She chuckled softly, shaking her head. "We sure did." They stood there quietly for a while, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The pain was still there, buried deep beneath layers of healing, but it no longer controlled them. Instead, it served as a reminder of their strength, their resilience, and their ability to turn tragedy into triumph. As they walked back toward the car, hand in hand, she glanced at him and smiled. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face, them together, as a family. And nothing, not even the darkest shadows of the past, could dim the light they carried within.